Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man of the Silver Mountain, and welcome back. Now today I wanted to talk about something that was raised to me by Hannah, actually, because she took a look at it, and like many of the other people who have looked at this particular thing over the last couple of weeks, there's a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction that led to a little bit of kind of contention over the topic. And as a result, though, after having a discussion with her, there was much more kind of expanded from it that allowed her to see it in a better light, and also just got me thinking of again, a lot of these arguments, a lot of these controversies that we see in the world today, so many of them come from just a random misunderstanding or from people not really getting to the root of something rather than anything else. And so the thing that I'm talking about here is the study being put forward by a research student at the University of Sydney, into how endometriosis, which is a condition that affects women, where the tissue from inside the womb is found outside of it, and it can be incredibly painful, incredibly difficult to deal with. In terms of treatments and things, it can mean an awful lot of drugs and surgeries, and there's nothing there's continuing work going into the development of better treatments for it, which is part of why there's controversy around this whole thing. But ultimately, this student went and posed the question of what kind of impact endometriosis in women would have on their partners. Predominantly male partners is the way that it is put forward in the study itself. And a lot of people were coming out and crying out about how this is insensitive, how this is such a bad thing, how endometriosis is so ignored. And how, this is only really focusing on them, and it's terrible. And whether this was done as more of a publicity stunt to highlight the issue as being kind of, oh look, people only care when it affects men, or whatever else, regardless of which spin you want to put on it, if we actually look at the question, look at the study, and look at the context, as well as looking at some of the claims being made, then we see a different picture than the one that's being presented in an awful lot of these knee-jerk reaction, highly negative news articles. So the first thing I want to touch on, though, is the core of the study. Now, first off, people going, oh, it's insensitive because it's focused on the partners, on the men that are with these women who are suffering from endometriosis as a condition. And it's like, how is that a problem? Firstly, this is a question being posed by a research student that is seemingly having no funding put towards it, because it is literally just a set of survey questions and interviews, which means that really and truly you can do that on SurveyMonkey for free, basically, is what this student is doing, but they are gathering information. And more information is good, right? Think about it this way. Cancer sufferers. If we take endometriosis and cancer as somewhat comparable, yeah? Tissue growing in a place that it shouldn't be, that causes a whole slew of negative effects. In which case, think about it this way. More studies and more work that was done with the partners and the people who were close to cancer sufferers allowed for a greater education being made available to those people, a greater amount of support being made available to those people, and then conversely, that meant that it was the sufferer of the condition, the sufferer of the disease, was then also granted through another person that was close to them, but they were still granted additional support that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Not to mention the fact that sometimes external observations can yield interesting results and generate more questions for further inquiry. So, first off, at the core of this entire situation with the study, the more information that can be gathered on endometriosis as a condition, both internally and externally, is only ever going to be more beneficial. If that means having one study, only one, done by a research student, which requires no funding essentially, to go and ask men about their experiences in regards to dealing with it with their partner, then that could potentially provide new perspectives. It could generate a very targeted set of ideas of kind of where men need more support or education to help them help their partners, so that their partner then gets, who is suffering from the condition, then gets a greater quality of care, and a greater level of understanding from their partner, so that it isn't as awkward or frustrating or as much of a problem overall, in terms of their interactions. You know, there is a lot of stuff there that unless you ask the question, you don't find the answers. And as a result of not finding the answers, it leaves an awful lot of women with who are suffering from this condition with a lot less support than they may well otherwise get. So at the core of the study, just asking the question, finding out more information, is a good thing. The women who have come out against this, who are sufferers or who are politically motivated, and they feel that this is insensitive and terrible just because one news outlet somewhere decided to big it up to begin with and it's just snowballed. Either those people are having the same knee-jerk reaction that, say, Hannah did when she first saw the headline of, oh, study focuses on men in regards to women's condition, or it's a case of just feeling hurt and ignored, when this is the problem. Questions need to be asked. They do. There's no way around it. I in my day-to-day, in my role with clients and with other people that are around me and that I work with, if it weren't for asking questions, then nothing would get done. I wouldn't be able to do my job without asking questions. And yeah, I'm not going to say that there aren't stupid questions, but even if the question is a stupid one, it should still be asked so that then it can get crossed off the list. This, though, isn't a stupid question, as it can highlight very specific areas for not direct support, but kind of tangential support for these women who are suffering from this condition. Now, I want to move on to some of the other claims. Firstly, the one where there are so many people who have shouted out about this, about how endometriosis as a condition is ignored. Firstly, it took me only a couple of Google searches to find a whole list of various studies, that many of which are ongoing, that are being done into endometriosis, both in terms of treatment, management, and so on. Many of which in the lists that I found supported by the World Health Organization, the NHS in the UK. There were a whole list of them funded by a collection of universities that I can't recall off the top of my head, from the States. And so as a result, there are studies out there. In fact, I found one in the UK, which, if I can find it again, I will. If I can find the links for it again, I'll leave it in the description. That was looking for volunteers to take part in the study so that they could gain more information, and yet they seem to be having trouble finding those people. So it's not being ignored, but as with a lot of research, you know, it's done in highly academic environments, behind closed doors, locked up with government money or corporate money, and on the corporate side they want to keep it behind closed doors so that then they avoid kind of corporate espionage and things like that. When it's public sector, they want to make sure that it's controlled well enough so that the spending isn't outrageous, so that they don't get shat on by the voting populace in regards to this, you know, this set of studies that they're doing. And as a result, yeah, you probably aren't as well aware of those studies. But as said, it took me maybe 5-10 minutes on Google, just punching in a couple of different search terms about endometriosis research and things like that, that it came up with these lists of research that have been done or that are being done. And so it's not being ignored, it's just that, as with many things, you don't hear about every single drug trial. You only hear about drug trials and things when they either are incredibly controversial, may not work, may work very well, or may be the biggest dumpster fire that you've ever seen. And so as a result, all those other random drugs that are in the middle that might be helpful, might not be helpful, all those other treatments that are highly experimental but aren't controversial in any way, it's maybe just a different cocktail of drugs, or a different approach to surgery. Those kind of things we don't hear about. So it's not being ignored just because you aren't aware of it. All it takes is a little bit of research, as said, 5-10 minutes whilst I was still having this discussion with Hannah about this particular topic, but about these articles, and it was done. And then the last point is that I've seen a lot of people see research and instantly say, "Oh, well, it's attached to jumping on with money's got to be put towards this, right? There has to be some money being put towards it if it's research from a university." And simply put, no. Jane Keeney, I believe that's how you pronounce her name, the researcher behind it, who did, as I've already suggested, defend her study by saying that talking to men will actually in turn help women struggling with the condition by the development of the means of support that you can offer men in terms of education, so that then they know what to do when it comes to women. This is the problem that women already have in regards to things like their periods, and men kind of bowing away from them and finding them awkward to deal with. It's a case of if you don't educate these people about what is normal or about what comes with these specific topics, then they're the unknown. And we as a species are very, very good at being absolutely terrified of the unknown. And so as a result, a man who has a partner who then has to inform him of all of the ins and outs of their condition, especially one that can be particularly individualistic in regards to the way that it affects a person, like endometriosis, they're going to have to explain a lot, go through a lot. It might be very awkward, it might be very difficult, and it could lead to that man going, this is too much for me to handle, just because it's an awful lot of stuff just thrown at them all at once. Yeah? And I wouldn't recommend that or commend that kind of behaviour at all, but there are people who just can't deal with that stuff in a sudden flood, especially if it's coming in a very emotional way. And so as a result, in these situations where it becomes a case of going, right, well, this way women don't have to do all the explaining. They don't have to do all of the heartfelt openness. If that man is with them, then this is the info pack that they can be given. This is the website they can be linked to. This is all of the other assets that they can be given, so that then they don't step away. It's not something unusual or different. It's something that they're kind of somewhat aware of, that now they are very aware of, and they can do more to help. And it's something that kind of stands out to me in regards to this, especially considering that, again, this research is, for the most part, one of the least expensive forms of research that could be done. This is the equivalent of something like running a poll on SurveyMonkey, or even a Twitter poll or something like that, just to gain specifics. And it's, from what I understand, there's been follow-up with certain other kind of bits and pieces, interviews of certain people and so on, but it's not the biggest difference. And Ms. Keeney, Jane Keeney, the researcher, actually said, she thought this kind of reaction could occur. And she says, in a sense, it mimics what happens for men. Some men have said they are really scared of expressing their own sexual needs because their partner is in such a bad way, so they just have to set their own needs aside. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's a giving thing, in fact. But let's see if we can use that to open up the conversation more broadly. So when you've got men who are having to ignore their needs because they care about someone else, that means that they're willing to put at least some effort in, right? They're willing to forego their own needs on behalf of someone else that they care about. In which case, what she's saying is, let's take advantage of the fact that there are those people out there who are willing to put their own needs completely aside on, for the sake of their partner, and let's have this conversation, open it up some more, and as a result gain a greater understanding of the environment that woman is going to be living in, and then also provide the extra support for him so that he can be a better support for her. It's all a cascade. It's all about developing a better environment for the woman who is suffering endometriosis, which at the moment is not something that a lot of the other studies are looking at, because they're looking at drug concoctions for management. They're looking at surgery methods. They're looking at the early onset signs and markers so that endometriosis can potentially be identified earlier and more thoroughly, rather than it just being brushed off as stomach cramps or pains or whatever else that it may very well otherwise be confused for by a GP that maybe isn't as aware of how things are working inside of their patient's body. And so as a result, where you've got a lot of it focused on just the treatment and the biological side, the physiological side, poking things with needles, taking biopsies, trying drugs, the environment molds us as much as anything else. And being in a loving, caring environment with a lot of support is so much more useful to someone, say, recovering from a surgery or having to maintain their kind of schedule of drugs, than an environment where it's more skeptical of what's going on, or where it's more uncertain, or where there's this tension because there's no understanding between the two, and sacrifices are having to be made on potentially both sides, but but there's a lack of communication. So this one study could be incredibly valuable to improving the entire environment that a woman finds herself in, just by asking a couple of simple questions that cost no one anything. And yet all of these people are flipping out about how terrible this is, how appalling this is that the question was even asked. No one should be afraid to ask questions. I applaud Ms. Keeney for both anticipating the fact that this reaction could occur to her work, but also for actually not being afraid to ask the question in the first place and pursue it. Because, as said, there's no such thing as a question that shouldn't be asked. There may very well be stupid questions, but there is no such thing as a question that shouldn't be asked, and that no one should be afraid of asking questions. If you're afraid of saying certain things or doing certain things, fine, but there should be no reason to be afraid of asking a question. Because without questions, we don't get answers, and without answers, people are going to continue to suffer for longer. And so, it's something that needs to be addressed, and it's something that needs to be worked on. Whether there are people that feel like, oh, it's insensitive or not, it doesn't matter. It's science. Science has to be as removed from emotion as possible so that it can focus on the facts, so that it can focus on the things that are solid, quantifiable, So if you've got a lot of men that are being surveyed and it comes down to a whole collection of very specific points where men are uncertain, where they need maybe some extra counselling or some more emotional support as they become a carer for someone who has gone through multiple surgeries and who may very well be laid out for 6 to 8 months as a result of the extent of those surgeries. It's a case of going, look, there needs to be a good balance of things across what's going on here. And that includes the people who are closest to the individuals suffering endometriosis as a condition, so that they can step up. Men, I can speak from my own experience with partners, especially with Hannah at the moment, who actually brought this to me to discuss with me. And like I can say that if she's in trouble, if she's in pain, if she's got a problem, then I want to help. The fact that we live a while apart, it makes that difficult sometimes, but I will do what I can, as best I can. And I know that there are an awful lot of other partners that are like that, who see their other half as someone that they want to help, that they want to work with. And we've talked about this before, where it should be a case of asking support or asking if they need support rather than just trying to take over their problem. But obviously when it comes to something that's an internal bodily mechanism that's going haywire, you can't really take over that problem for them, but you can do stuff to help them. And so guess what? If there's more information available, more counselling available, more extra resources available for those partners to use to make their wife, girlfriend, whoever more comfortable, to look after them better, to make sure that they recover as fast as possible, that they live the fullest life regardless of how miserable it might be with the drugs, surgeries, the pain and whatever else, it all becomes a case of going, right, well, surely that's a good thing, isn't it? If you've got a workforce that want to work to solve the problem purely because they care, isn't that the best form of workforce? Isn't that exactly what you need for a situation like this where people are suffering? And so to all of the women who were just complaining, saying how terrible it is that this question would even be asked, that people only care because it's men and all the rest of it, that's complete bollocks, because the entire thing is still focused on women. And when it comes to the whole, there's not enough going on around endometriosis, that's a huge misconception in regards to what research is going on, just because people aren't aware of it. People aren't looking for it. It's not obvious. From some of the things that have been put out by Endometriosis Australia, and from a couple of other resources relatively close to Sydney University and the stuff that's been going on. Endometriosis Australia refused to comment. Endoactive, which is a support group for sufferers of endometriosis, they made a point of saying that worldwide there are 800 to 1,000 different research projects going on in regards to it. So there is a fair amount of stuff going on in the medical community to develop things for endometriosis. But again, people just aren't aware of it. So the last point that I want to make is just that it's more worthwhile to let people ask questions and have answers found. Even if they're answers that aren't satisfying. Even if they're answers that aren't going to necessarily help things suddenly get better in the blink of an eye. If there's a question to ask the question, because then once the question's answered, you can move on. And in regards to this, the answers to these questions could very well improve the lives of the people suffering with this condition. It's not as unheard of as it was at one point. You know, there are more people who are aware of it, or who, considering I believe the number on average is somewhere between kind of 1 and 2 women out of every 10 suffer in some way from a form of endometriosis. It's a case of going, right, well that's a substantial number of women worldwide. So how about you don't just shoot down any attempt to engage the entire other half of the species and kind of find out how best to get them to help? Just a thought. But anyway, guys, it's an interesting topic, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the video tomorrow. Or later. Later, in fact. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, found it interesting, please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the video later. Take care.